My husband humiliated me in front of his family and called me heartless, but he never knew I was the one holding his dying mother's hand at the end. And when he threw away the proof she left me, I destroyed the lie he built against me. My name is Kestrel Morrow Hale, and the last time my husband called me his wife, he was standing under a chandelier in front of 80 people, explaining why I did not deserve a chair at his mother's memorial dinner. He said I had left his family when his mother needed me most. He said I had used her sickness to make myself look important. Then he looked at the small blue sewing journal in my hands and told everyone I had come there to steal one more moment of attention from a dead woman. I did not cry. I did not shout. I only placed that journal beside his mother's framed photograph and said, "Your mother asked me to bring this when your family made a stage out of her name." My husband laughed once, the kind of laugh people use when they want a room to laugh with them, and then he shoved the journal off the table. A copper key slid across the floor. A sealed envelope opened halfway under a chair, and one old woman near the front row stood up so fast her cane fell beside her. 2 days later, my husband stood outside my rented bungalow with that same journal pressed against his chest, asking me to hear him out. By then, his mother had already told the truth. The dinner was held at the Copper Lantern Lodge in Traverse City, Michigan, with Lake Michigan dark and silver beyond the tall windows. The Hale family never chose small rooms for big lies. They chose rooms with polished wood floors, white tablecloths, blue hydrangeas, and servers moving around like quiet ghosts. There was a large photograph of Sorrel Ames Hale near the stage, smiling in her pale blue cardigan with one hand resting on a quilt she had made long before illness bent her fingers. Under the photograph, someone had placed a sign that said, "The Sorrel Hale Care Fund." The words looked clean, noble, almost holy. If I had not known the family, I might have believed them. But I knew every person at the front table. I knew Tobin's practiced grief. I knew Yardley's careful smile. I knew Garen's silence. I knew Lowen's habit of looking at the strongest person in the room before deciding what he believed. And I knew Sorrel. That was why I had come. I was not invited. I knew that before I parked my old gray Subaru between 2 black SUVs and sat there for a full minute with both hands around the steering wheel. My wedding ring was no longer on my finger. I had left it in a drawer 6 months earlier, wrapped in a grocery receipt because I could not find a nicer way to bury a marriage that had already been dead for years. Still, my name was technically Kestrel Morrow Hale, and that name had been used against me all over town. People said I had married into the Hale family and then walked out when the work got heavy. They said Tobin had cared for his mother alone while I slept in another room and complained about the smell of medicine. They said I had left him grieving. They said I had not even stayed for the hard part. The strange thing about a lie is that once enough people repeat it gently, it starts wearing church clothes. I carried the blue sewing journal under my arm as I walked into the lodge. It was soft at the corners, covered in faded fabric with tiny white birds stitched across the front. Sorrel had made the cover herself years ago, back when her hands were quick and certain. A copper key was tied to the inside spine with a piece of blue thread. There were letters tucked into the back pocket, care logs folded between pages, and a small black USB drive taped beneath a quilt pattern called Morning Harbor. I had not opened everything when she first gave it to me. She had told me not to. Sorrel was weak then, but her mind had cleared like a window after rain. She had pressed the journal into my lap and whispered, "When they use my name to make themselves look kind, bring this back." I had asked her what she meant. She had looked toward the hallway, where Tobin was on the phone telling someone he was exhausted from managing Mom's care, while I stood there with her medication crushed into applesauce on a spoon. Sorrel had closed her eyes and said, "Enough truth to make silence unnecessary." At the lodge, Yardley saw me first. Of course she did. Yardley Hale Mercer had the talent of a hawk and the warmth of a locked cabinet. She was Tobin's older sister, 41, always dressed like she was stepping into a board meeting even when she was only stepping into a grocery store. That night she wore navy silk and pearl earrings, and when she saw me, her smile stayed in place but her eyes sharpened. She came across the room fast, one hand already lifted as if she could stop me with manners. "Kestrel," she said, soft enough that the guests nearby would think she was being kind. "This is not a good night for surprises." I looked past her to Sorrel's photograph, the blue flowers, the donation cards, the printed program that called Tobin a devoted son and caregiver. My throat tightened, but my voice stayed level. "I'm not here for a surprise," I said. "I'm here for a promise." Yardley's hand touched my elbow. It was not a grab, not yet, just a warning shaped like politeness. "You need to leave before Tobin sees you." I almost smiled at that. There had been a time when I would have done anything to avoid embarrassing Tobin. I used to fold myself smaller so his family could stay comfortable. I used to explain less, ask less, need less. I used to believe peace meant swallowing the truth before it made anyone choke. But caring for Sorrel had changed that. Watching a woman lose her body piece by piece teaches you what is worth protecting. It is not appearances. It is not reputation. It is not the family story printed on heavy paper. It is dignity. So I gently removed Yardley's hand from my elbow and said, "He can see me. He married me." Tobin saw me before I reached the front table. He was standing near the stage with a microphone in one hand, surrounded by people who were thanking him for creating the Care Fund. He looked handsome in the way strangers noticed first, and wives learned to question later. Dark jacket, clean shave, warm public eyes. Tobin Quaid Hale had always known how to become the man a room wanted. When we first met at a fall fundraiser 7 years earlier, I thought that was kindness. Later, I learned it was control. His face changed when he saw me, but only for a second. Then he smiled, and that was worse. He stepped down from the stage and came toward me while the room watched in small pieces. "Kestrel," he said, loud enough for the front tables. "I wish you had called before coming." That was Tobin. He could turn any wound into a scheduling problem. I did not answer him right away. I looked at Sorrel's picture instead. In that photo, she still looked like the woman who had welcomed me into the Hale Lake house with flour on her sleeve and told me I was too skinny to be trusted with my own lunch. She had been the first Hale to make room for me without making me earn it. Tobin's father, Garin, had been polite but distant. Yardley had inspected me like a new couch. Lowen had asked what my parents did for a living before he asked what I liked to do for fun. But Sorrel had patted the chair beside her and said, "Come here, Kestrel. Every family has a pattern. We'll see where you fit." I had laughed then because I thought she meant quilting. Later, I understood she meant survival. The illness started quietly. Sorrel forgot the word for colander while making pasta salad. Then she put salt in the sugar jar. Then she slipped in the sewing room and broke 2 fingers trying to catch herself on the cutting table. After that, the family held a meeting at the lake house, the kind of meeting where everyone says care, but mostly means money, time, and inconvenience. Yardley had a folder. Tobin had a tired face he had practiced in the mirror. Garen sat near the window and said very little. Lowen kept checking his phone. They discussed assisted living. They discussed selling a strip of lakefront property to pay for private care. They discussed what Sorel would have wanted without asking her, though she was sitting in the next room under a quilt, awake enough to hear raised voices and weak enough not to enter them. I asked one question. Who is going to sit with her at night when she gets scared? Nobody answered. That was the first honest thing that happened. So I stayed. Not all at once. That is not how caregiving traps you. It starts with one afternoon because everyone else is busy, then one weekend, then one missed shift at work, then one night on the couch because Sorel wakes up calling for her mother. Soon I was the one who knew which pills made her nauseous, which blanket helped her settle, which hallway light had to stay on, which songs from the 1970s could pull her back when fear took her somewhere none of us could follow. I worked remotely handling medical billing files during the day, then cooked soft food, washed sheets, argued with insurance, scheduled home nurses, and learned how to lift a grown woman without bruising her. Tobin thanked me at first. Then he expected it. Then he resented the fact that his mother smiled when I entered the room and stiffened when he did. The marriage did not break in one dramatic scene. It thinned. Tobin started staying late at the office. He said the house felt heavy. He said he needed air. He said I had made Sorrel's sickness my whole identity, as if someone else had volunteered to take the night shift, and I had rudely refused. Yardley came by once a week with flowers and stayed long enough to take pictures. She posted captions about strength, family, and hard seasons. I was never in the photos because I was usually in the kitchen washing the blender or upstairs changing Sorrel's gown. Garen sat with Sorrel sometimes, but only when she was asleep. Awake illness frightened him. Lowen visited when Yardley reminded him and left when things got uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Tobin told friends he was carrying a lot. He did not say I was the thing carrying him. Sorrel noticed more than they thought. Illness took her strength, not her sense. Some days she drifted far away, and some days she returned with painful clarity. On one of those clear days, she watched Tobin leave after a 10-minute visit, and then looked at me with tired eyes. "He wants to be seen grieving," she said. "He does not want to be changed by grief." I told her not to talk like that. She squeezed my hand. Her fingers were thin by then, but her grip still knew how to tell the truth. "You became my daughter when my own children became visitors," she said. I cried in the laundry room after that, into a towel warm from the dryer, because I loved her and because I knew love was not going to save my marriage. It was only going to reveal it. The last winter was the hardest. Lake snow piled against the doors. Pipes froze twice. Sorrel's pain changed shape every week. She forgot Tobin's name one morning and called him by his father's. He went outside and punched the side of the garage, then drove away for 6 hours. I stayed. That same week, a bill arrived from a home care agency Tobin had promised to pay. The account was 30 days late. I paid it from my own savings because the nurse on that bill had sat with Sorrel while I slept 3 hours, and people who do holy work should not have to beg rich families for checks. I paid for medicine twice. I paid for a wheelchair cushion. I kept receipts without knowing why. Maybe some part of me already understood that one day a lie would need paper to stand against it. Before Sorrel died, she had one afternoon that felt borrowed. The snow had melted. The lake was still cold and gray, but light came through the sewing room window like a blessing. She asked me to bring the blue journal from the bottom drawer of her cutting table. I thought she wanted to look at quilt patterns, so I carried it to her bed and sat beside her. She had already tucked letters inside. Her handwriting was shaky, but the envelopes were sealed. One said, "For Kestrel, when she doubts herself." Another said, "For my family, when they finally need the truth." There was also the copper key, the one she had worn on a chain when the lake house still had rooms nobody entered without asking. She put it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "This opens the sewing room cabinet," she whispered. "The rest is in there. Ione has the legal copy." I asked, "Ione who?" Sorrel smiled a little. "Braddock, my attorney. Don't look so surprised. Old women can still make appointments." I wanted to refuse the journal. It felt too heavy, too private, too much like being chosen for a storm. But Sorrel was looking at me the way she looked at fabric before cutting it, certain even when the pattern looked strange. "Do not bring this out because you are angry," she said. "Anger burns too fast. Bring it when they polish my name and use it as a mirror." I did not understand then. I only promised because dying women should not have to explain every final wisdom to the living. 3 weeks later, Sorrel died in the lake house, in the room with the blue curtains, with my hand on her shoulder and an old quilt across her knees. Tobin was 20 miles away at a client dinner. Yardley was at a charity lunch. Garen was in his truck in the driveway, unable to come inside. I was the one who heard Sorrel's last breath leave her. I was the one who closed her eyes. At the funeral, people hugged Tobin first. They told him he had been a wonderful son. He accepted their sympathy with both hands. I stood near the guest book, feeling like a ghost who had done all the haunting work. At the reception, Yardley told a woman from church, "Kestrel struggled with Mom's decline. Some people just aren't built for that kind of devotion." I waited for Tobin to correct her. He heard it. I saw him hear it. He looked at me, then looked away. Later, in our kitchen, I asked him why he had let her say that. He loosened his tie and said, "Because you did make it about yourself." I stared at him. He went on, softer and crueler. "You were useful when Mom needed someone. Now stop acting like this family owes you a medal." That was the sentence that ended us. Not legally, not yet. But inside me, something signed the papers. I left 2 days later with 2 suitcases, my laptop, and the blue journal wrapped in a towel. I rented a small bungalow on the edge of town where the porch sagged and the heater clicked like an old clock. I did not announce my leaving online. I did not post quotes about betrayal. I did not call his family. I simply stopped feeding a story that had learned to live on my silence. Tobin filed for separation 3 months later and told people I had abandoned him in grief. Yardley told people I had always been unstable. Lowen said he hoped I found peace, which is what weak people say when they do not want to know who stole it. Garen sent no message. The town believed what the Hales said because the Hales owned businesses, donated to hospitals, sponsored youth sailing, and smiled in photographs. I worked. I slept badly. I kept Sorrel's journal in the bottom drawer of my desk and waited without knowing what I was waiting for. Then the invitation appeared in my mailbox. Heavy cream paper, blue ink, the Sorrel Hale Care Fund dinner, a night to honor the family devotion that surrounded Sorrel in her final season. I read that line 3 times at my kitchen table while rain tapped on the windows. Family devotion, surrounded, final season. It was so clean it almost made me sick. The invitation said Tobin Quaid Hale would share a son's reflection on love, duty, and care. Yardley would introduce the fund's future plan. Donations would support caregiver resources in northern Michigan. I knew enough about Yardley to hear the business under the grief. I called Ione Braddock the next morning from my car because my hands were shaking too much to hold coffee. Ione's voice was calm and dry. She said Sorrel had expected this. She said the legal trust was active. She said the lake house could not be sold, rented, transferred, or used for family profit for 10 years. Then she said, "Mrs. Hale, your mother-in-law named you controlling trustee." I sat there in the parking lot outside my office, watching people walk into work with lunch bags and umbrellas, while my old life turned a key inside my new one. Ione explained the trust in plain words. Sorrel had placed the lake house and a separate care account under a caregiver respite trust. The house was to be used for one of two purposes: temporary rest for exhausted family caregivers, or private residence for me if I chose. Tobin and Yardley had no control over it. Garen had a limited advisory role, but no sale authority. If the family attempted to raise money in Sorrel's name while misrepresenting her care, the trustee had the right to demand public correction and account review. I almost laughed then, not because it was funny, but because Sorrel had sewn a legal seam so tight nobody could pull it apart without showing their hands. I went to the dinner because Sorrel had told me to bring the journal when they made a stage out of her name. And there it was, a real stage, a real microphone, a real room filled with people ready to applaud a lie. Tobin gave his speech before I reached the front. I stood at the back near the coat room and listened. He spoke beautifully. I will give him that. He talked about late nights, hard choices, the honor of caring for a parent, and the pain of being left by people who could not handle the weight. He did not say my name at first. He did not have to. People turned slightly, whispering as they noticed me standing there. Then he looked directly at me and said, "My mother taught me that love stays, even when others walk away." The room went quiet with sympathy that did not belong to him. That was when I started walking. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. The blue journal was in both hands. Yardley moved first, but Beryl Cattrall blocked her without seeming to. Beryl was Sorrel's neighbor, 78 years old, small as a folded umbrella and twice as difficult to move. She had brought soup during the winter and sat with Sorrel on days when I needed to shower without listening for the bell. Beryl had seen things. Yardley had forgotten that witnesses do not always look important. When I reached the table beneath Sorrel's photograph, Tobin stepped down from the stage. His face was tight now. "Kestrel," he said into the microphone before lowering it. "This is not the time." I placed the journal beside his mother's picture. "Your mother chose the time," I said. "I'm only following instructions." People leaned forward. That is what rooms do when a private wound becomes public. Tobin looked at the journal and then at me, and his public grief cracked just enough for anger to show through. "You do not get to use my mother to clean your name," he said. "You left this family." I looked at him for a long second. I remembered him leaving the house during snowstorms. I remembered him ignoring calls from the pharmacy. I remembered Sorrel asking why her son's footsteps sounded like a visitor's. "No," I said quietly. "I left you after she was gone. There is a difference." His face darkened. Yardley whispered his name, warning him to stay polished. He did not listen. Men like Tobin can perform sorrow for a crowd, but they often cannot perform restraint when the truth stands too close. He reached for the journal. I thought he would open it. For one foolish second, I hoped shame might make him careful. Instead, he shoved it away from Sorrel's photograph. The journal hit the floor, not hard enough to break, but hard enough to scatter what was tucked loose inside. The copper key slid in a bright little curve across the wood. The family letter slipped halfway from its envelope. The USB drive tapped against the leg of Beryl's chair. The whole room seemed to inhale. Tobin's hand stayed in the air for a second, as if he had not realized what he had done until the silence showed him. Then Beryl bent slowly, picked up the copper key, and held it between two fingers. Her voice was thin but clear. "Sorrel wore this key around her neck the last winter," she said. "She told me only one other person had a copy." Tobin said, "Beryl, please." That was his mistake. He said it like she was an old woman to manage. Beryl straightened, and her eyes went sharp. "No," she said. "I stayed quiet at the funeral because Sorrel was gone, and this girl looked too tired to survive another fight. But I will not sit here and listen to you sell tickets to a version of care you did not provide." A murmur moved across the room. Yardley stood frozen beside the donation table. Garen's face went pale. Lowen looked at Tobin, then at me, then at the key in Beryl's hand. Beryl turned toward the guests. Kestrel was in that house every morning. She handled medicine, nurses, meals, bills, and nights most of you cannot imagine. I saw her carry Sorrel from the bathroom when her legs failed. I saw her sleep in a chair for weeks. I saw her pay a nurse when the family account was late. Do not tell me she walked away. She was the one who stayed after everyone else became busy. I did not speak. I could not. There are moments when being defended feels almost as painful as being attacked because your body has prepared for another blow, not for rescue. Tobin looked around the room, searching for the old agreement, the easy sympathy, the nodding faces. He did not find them. People were recalculating. I could see it in their eyes. The printed programs suddenly looked different. The donation cards looked different. The phrase "devoted son" looked smaller than it had 10 minutes before. I bent down and gathered the journal, the envelope, and the USB drive. Beryl handed me the key with both hands, like she was returning a piece of Sorrel herself. I tucked it back into the journal and faced Tobin. "She left a letter for the family," I said. My voice was steady, though my chest hurt. "I was told not to read it to you in a room full of people unless you forced me to. I'm not going to let you make me cruel just because you were careless." I held the envelope out to him. He did not take it. Garen stood then. For the first time all night, his voice entered the room. "Take it, Tobin." Tobin turned toward his father, shocked. Garen did not look at him. He looked at the envelope. "Take your mother's letter." So Tobin took it. His fingers brushed mine, and I felt nothing that belonged to marriage. Only the cold passing of evidence. I looked once at Sorrel's photograph. "Your mother did not want revenge," I said. "She wanted the record corrected." Then I turned and walked out of the lodge before anyone could turn my pain into their entertainment. Behind me, the room did not erupt the way people imagine rooms do. It went low and restless, full of whispers, chairs moving, a microphone humming on the stage. Outside, the lake air was cold enough to make my eyes water, which was useful because I could pretend that was why they burned. I sat in my car for a minute with both hands empty for the first time all night. Then I drove home to my little bungalow, made tea I did not drink, and waited for the dead woman's handwriting to do what my living voice had never been allowed to do. They read the letter at the lake house that night. I know because Garen told me later, and because Ione confirmed what happened after. Tobin, Yardley, Lowen, and Garen gathered around the old dining table where Sorrel used to cut pie too large for anyone's plate. Tobin opened the envelope with hands that were no longer steady. Sorrel's letter was 4 pages. She did not insult them. That would have been easier for them to reject. She simply told the truth in the plain voice of a woman who had watched her own family choose comfort over courage. She wrote that illness does not only reveal the weakness of a body, it reveals the architecture of a family. She wrote that Kestrel had preserved my dignity when my own children could not bear to witness my decline. She wrote that Tobin wanted the title of devoted son without the inconvenience of devotion. She wrote that Yardley loved order more than mercy. She wrote that Garen's silence had become a room where other people's lies could grow. She wrote that Lowen was not cruel, but cowardice repeated often enough can still injure. Then came the records, copies of payments I had made, care notes in Sorrel's own hand from the days she was clear enough to write, dates of visits, missed appointments, a list titled, "Things Kestrel Did When No One Was Watching." I did not know she had kept that list. I still have not read all of it. Some tenderness is too sharp to touch bare-handed. Last, Sorrel explained the trust. The lake house was not going to Yardley. It was not going to Tobin. It was not going to be sold quietly under the excuse of maintenance costs. It would stand for 10 years as a place of rest for people doing the kind of care that empties a person from the inside. Kestrel will decide how it is used, she wrote. She understands the labor because she paid it. If that feels unfair to you, sit with that feeling until it becomes honesty. The family called me that night. Tobin first, then Yardley, then Lowen. Garen did not call until morning. I did not answer any of them, not because I wanted them to suffer, but because I had learned the difference between urgency and accountability. Urgency is what people feel when consequences arrive. Accountability is what remains after the panic leaves. I slept badly but deeply, the way you sleep after carrying something heavy and finally putting it down. The next afternoon, Tobin came to my door. He looked like he had aged 5 years in 2 days. His hair was uncombed. His eyes were red. He held the blue journal against his chest like a shield that had arrived too late. "Kestrel," he said. One word. My name. It sounded strange in his mouth without an audience. I stood in the doorway and did not invite him in. My porch light was still on, though it was afternoon, because the switch stuck sometimes, and I had stopped caring about small, imperfect things. He looked past me into the little house, at the thrift store lamp, the stack of billing files, the mug on the side table. Maybe he expected to see ruin. Maybe it surprised him that I had built a life quiet enough not to need his approval. "I read it," he said. I nodded. He swallowed. "I didn't know she saw it that way." That was the first wrong thing he said. I let it sit between us until he heard it. Then I answered, "You mean you didn't know she wrote it down?" His face folded. "I was ashamed," he said. "I hated that you were better at being there for her than I was. I hated walking into that room and seeing her calm down when you touched her hand. I told myself you were taking my place." I looked at the man I had once loved, and for the first time his confession did not pull me toward him. It only explained the shape of the damage. "I was not taking your place," I said. "I was standing in the place you left empty." He closed his eyes. For a moment, I saw the boy Sorrel must have loved before he became a man too proud to be taught by grief. That made me sad. It did not make me soften. He asked if we could talk inside. I said no. He asked if the marriage was really over. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because men like Tobin often think a marriage ends when they finally feel the loss, not when they caused it. "It ended in your kitchen," I said. "The night you told me I was useful and then unnecessary." He flinched. "Good. Some sentences should return to the person who made them." He said he was sorry. He said he would correct the story. He said the fund would be paused and reviewed. He said Yardley had stepped down from the committee. He said Guerin wanted to speak to me. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "You are going to tell the truth publicly, not because it wins me back, but because you used public lies to bury me." 3 weeks later, Tobin stood in the same lodge with no chandelier dinner, no blue flowers, no donation cards. Just a small group of board members, family friends, and people who had heard the first speech. He corrected the record, not perfectly. Shame makes people clumsy, but he said enough. He said I had cared for Sorrel. He said he had allowed a false story to protect his reputation. He said the care fund would be transferred under the trust's purpose and reviewed by Ione Braddock's office. Yardley sent a written apology that sounded like it had been held at gunpoint by a lawyer, but she sent it. Lowen came to my office and cried in the parking lot. Guerin wrote me a letter in blocky handwriting, admitting that silence had been easier than defending the truth. I kept the letter. I did not know what else to do with it. The divorce became final in early spring. I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning and then drove to the lake house. The air smelled like wet wood and thawing earth. Inside, the sewing room waited under a thin layer of dust. I unlocked the old cabinet with the copper key and found what Sorrel had left behind. Quilt squares sorted by color, notes in the margins of pattern books, a tin of buttons, and a list of names. Not family names. Caregivers. Women and men Sorrel had known from church, the hospital, the neighborhood. People caring for spouses, parents, disabled children, aging friends. At the top of the list she had written, "They need rest before they disappear." That was when I understood the trust fully. Sorrel had not given me the house to punish her children. She had given me a door and asked me to keep opening it. By summer, the Hale Lake House hosted its first caregiver weekend. One woman arrived with deep circles under her eyes and a tote bag full of books she probably would not have the energy to read. Her husband had dementia. Her daughter had given her 2 days off and cried from guilt while dropping her there. I showed her the blue room, the clean sheets, the view of the lake. She touched the quilt on the bed and asked who made it. "Sorrel Hale," I said. She believed tired people deserved beautiful things. The woman sat on the edge of the bed and started crying with one hand over her mouth, embarrassed by her own exhaustion. I sat beside her until she stopped apologizing. I knew that kind of crying. It is not weakness. It is a body finally believing it is safe. I still see Tobin sometimes. Traverse City is not large enough for clean disappearances. He looks at me like a man looking through a window he broke himself. I do not hate him. Hate would keep too much of me tied to his front porch. I let him be a lesson with a face. Yardley avoids me, which is a kindness I accept. Lowen volunteers at the house twice a month, quiet and awkward but sincere. Guerin came once and stood in Sorrel's sewing room for almost an hour without speaking. Before he left, he said, "She would have liked this." I said, "She planned this." He nodded like the difference hurt, which it should. As for me, I kept the blue journal. It sits on the sewing table now, not hidden, not displayed like a trophy, just present. Some days I open it and read one page. Some days I do not need to. I know what it says. It says care counts even when nobody claps. It says silence is not the same as guilt. It says a woman can be shamed in a room full of people and still walk out with the truth intact. My husband shamed me in front of his family, but his mother had left me the truth. And in the end, the truth did not arrive screaming. It arrived stitched into a faded blue journal, tied to a copper key, waiting for the right hands to open the door. The end. Commentary, discussion, and lessons. Now let's slow down and talk about what really happened in this story, because this was not just a story about a husband shaming his wife in public. This was a story about invisible work. It was about the kind of care that happens in quiet rooms, late at night, when nobody is taking pictures, nobody is clapping, and nobody is posting beautiful words online. Kestrel was not trying to become a hero. She was not trying to win a family contest. She simply stayed when someone was sick, weak, afraid, and unable to protect herself. And that is what makes this story powerful. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is not the person holding the microphone. Sometimes it is the person standing at the back, holding the truth, waiting for the right moment to stop carrying everyone else's lie. At the beginning of the story, we see Kestrel walking into the Copper Lantern Lodge with Sorrel's blue sewing journal in her hands. That image matters. She is not carrying diamonds. She is not carrying a legal weapon in a black folder. She is carrying something soft, old, and personal. A sewing journal. That tells us a lot about the heart of this story. This truth was not built in one loud moment. It was stitched together slowly. One care note, one receipt, one memory, one quiet witness, one final letter. And that is exactly how real truth often works. Lies can travel fast, especially in families. A lie can be repeated at dinners, church events, family calls, and social gatherings until people start treating it like history. But truth does not always move fast. Sometimes truth waits. Sometimes truth stays folded in a drawer until the people who lied finally create the stage for their own exposure. The biggest pain in this story is not only that Tobin lied. The deeper pain is that he used Kestrel's kindness against her. She cared for his mother. She gave her time, her sleep, her money, and her emotional strength. Then, when Sorrel died, Tobin and his family turned that same sacrifice into a weakness. They said Kestrel made her self-important. They said she was unstable. They said she walked away. Think about how cruel that is. It is one thing when someone does not thank you. That hurts, but you can survive it. It is another thing when someone takes the very work you did for them and rewrites it as selfishness. That kind of betrayal does not just hurt the heart. It makes a person question reality. It makes them ask, did I really do the right thing? Did anyone see me? Did any of it matter? And this is where Sorrel's letter becomes so important. Sorrel saw. She remembered. She wrote it down. She made sure Kestrel would not have to defend her own goodness alone. Tobin is an interesting character because he is not written like a simple villain who wakes up every morning planning evil things. His weakness is more realistic than that. He wants the image of devotion without the labor of devotion. He wants people to believe he was the loyal son, but he does not want to sit through the hard nights. He wants sympathy, but he does not want sacrifice. And that is a very human kind of failure. Many people want credit for values they have not practiced. They want to be seen as loving, loyal, faithful, responsible, and brave. But when life asks them to prove it in an ugly, tiring, uncomfortable way, they step back. Then someone else steps forward. And later, instead of feeling grateful, they feel ashamed. That shame becomes resentment. That resentment becomes a lie. And that lie becomes a public story. That is what happened to Tobin. Kestrel did not steal his place. She stood in the place he left empty. That line is one of the deepest truths in the story. Yardley also plays a very important role. She represents the person in the family who manages the image. She knows how things should look. She understands programs, donation cards, speeches, flowers, and public respect. But she does not understand humility. She helps create the Care Fund dinner because she wants Sorrel's name to look beautiful in public. But she forgets that Sorrel was not just a name. Sorrel was a living woman who suffered, watched, listened, and understood exactly who was present and who was only performing. Yardley's mistake is that she thinks presentation can replace truth. She thinks if the event looks polished enough, the story will become clean. But truth has a way of ruining perfect decorations. One copper key on the floor can do more damage than 100 beautiful speeches. And then we have Garin, the silent father. His role is quiet, but very serious. He is not the one giving the speech. He is not the one pushing the journal. He is not the one attacking Kestrel. But silence can still be part of the harm. Garin knew enough. He saw enough. He understood more than he wanted to admit. But he stayed quiet because silence was easier than conflict. This is a lesson many families need to hear. When a lie is being told and you know the truth, your silence is not neutral. Silence often protects the person with more power. Silence makes the victim look alone. Silence gives the lie more room to grow. Garin's later apology matters, but it cannot erase the years when his silence helped bury Kestrel's truth. The public humiliation scene is the turning point because Tobin believes he controls the room. He has the microphone. He has the family name. He has the public sympathy. He has the polished event. Kestrel has only a faded journal. But that is the beauty of the scene. She does not need to overpower him. She only needs to place the truth where the lie is standing. When Tobin shoves the journal away, he thinks he is rejecting her. But actually, he is exposing himself. The copper key falls out. The USB falls out. The letter appears. Suddenly, the object he disrespected becomes the thing that changes the room. This is a powerful storytelling moment because the villain creates his own downfall. Kestrel does not throw anything. She does not scream his secrets. She gives him a chance to be careful, and he chooses arrogance. That choice reveals him. Beryl's role is also very meaningful. She is the witness. And in stories like this, the witness is often the person everyone underestimates. She is old. She is small. She is not the richest person in the room. She does not have the microphone. But she has something more important. She saw the truth with her own eyes. When Beryl speaks, the whole room changes because Kestrel is no longer standing alone. That is a major lesson. Sometimes people do not believe the person who was hurt because the lie has already trained them not to. But when an honest witness speaks, the lie loses its balance. Beryl does not need fancy words. She simply says what she saw. Kestrel was there. Kestrel handled the medicine. Kestrel paid the bills. Kestrel stayed through the hard nights. Tobin and Yardley cannot decorate their way out of that. Sorrel's planning is the heart of the story. She knew her family. She knew Tobin wanted praise. She knew Yardley wanted control. She knew Garin would avoid confrontation. She knew Lowen would follow whatever story sounded safest. But she also knew Kestrel. She knew Kestrel would not fight dirty. She knew Kestrel might stay silent even when silence hurt her. So Sorrel left proof. Not just feelings, not just a sweet message. She left care logs, payment records, legal documents, a voice recording, letters, and a trust. That is important because truth needs protection. In real life, good intentions are not always enough. If people are willing to rewrite your story, sometimes you need records. You need dates. You need witnesses. You need documents. Sorrel understood that love without proof can be erased by people who are confident enough to lie. The Lake House Trust is one of the strongest twists because it changes the story from emotional revenge to practical justice. Sorrel did not only say, Kestrel was good. She gave Kestrel authority. She gave her control over the house. She stopped the family from selling it or turning it into profit, and she turned that house into something meaningful, a place of rest for tired caregivers. That is beautiful because the ending does not become bitter. Kestrel does not use power to destroy people. She uses power to continue Sorrel's values. She turns pain into shelter. She takes a house full of family lies and turns it into a place where tired people can breathe. That is not just revenge. That is healing with boundaries. One of the most mature parts of the story is that Kestrel does not take Tobin back. This matters. In many stories, when the husband finally cries, apologizes, and realizes the truth, the wife runs back into his arms. But this story chooses a stronger ending. Kestrel listens. She accepts that he may be sorry, but she does not confuse apology with restoration. An apology can be real and still come too late for the relationship. Someone can regret hurting you and still not deserve access to your life again. Kestrel understands that. She does not need to hate Tobin. She also does not need to return to him. That is emotional growth. She says, in her own way, I can hear your apology without making myself your wife again. That lesson is very important for the audience. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Forgiveness is about releasing poison from your own heart. Reconciliation is about rebuilding trust with another person. And trust is not rebuilt with one speech, one tearful visit, or one guilty face at the door. Trust is rebuilt through truth, time, changed behavior, and accountability. Tobin publicly lied about Kestrel, so he had to publicly correct the lie. That was not revenge. That was repair. If someone damages your name in public, they should not expect to fix it only in private. Private apologies do not repair public humiliation. Another strong lesson is about caregiving. The story reminds us that caregiving is often invisible because it happens away from the stage. Nobody sees the 2 a.m. water cup. Nobody sees the laundry. Nobody sees the fear. Nobody sees the forms, the bills, the medication schedule, the body pain, the emotional exhaustion, the quiet crying in another room. But those things are real. They are not small. They are not just helping. They are labor. They are love in action. And if you know someone who is caring for a sick parent, a spouse, a grandparent, or a child, do not wait until they break to notice them. Send the message now. Bring food now. Sit with them now. Ask what they need now. Because after someone dies, many people bring flowers. But during the hard months, what the caregiver needs is not flowers. They need rest, help, and someone brave enough to enter the difficult room. This story also teaches us about family reputation. The Hale family had a good name in town. They donated money. They hosted events. They knew how to look respectable. But respectability is not the same as character. A family can look beautiful from the outside and still hide cruelty inside. A person can give speeches about love and still fail the person sleeping in the next room. A family can raise money in someone's name and still ignore what that person truly valued. That is why we should be careful before believing the loudest version of any family story. Sometimes the person being called difficult is the only one who told the truth. Sometimes the person being called selfish is the only one who gave everything. Kestrel's strength is not loud, and that is why it feels real. She is hurt, but she is not reckless. She is angry, but she does not let anger drive the car. She is humiliated, but she keeps her dignity. When Tobin shames her, she does not become like him. She does not use the USB drive to destroy him in the cruelest way possible. She gives him the letter and leaves. That restraint is powerful. Real strength is not always about saying the sharpest thing. Sometimes strength is knowing you could hurt someone badly, but choosing only the truth. Kestrel's revenge works because it is clean. It does not need exaggeration. It does not need drama. It only needs facts. There is also a deep message in Sorrel's words. When they use my name to make themselves look kind, bring this back. That line tells us Sorrel understood something painful. She knew that after death, people often try to own the memory of the person who died. They tell stories that make themselves look better. They use grief as a costume. They say beautiful words about duty, love, and family, even if they did not live those words when it mattered. Sorrel refused to let her name be used that way. She left Kestrel the power to protect the truth. That is why the blue journal is not just an object. It is Sorrel's final voice. The ending at the lake house gives the story its peace. Kestrel could have walked away from everything. She could have sold her pain back to the family in the form of anger. But instead, she opens the house for caregivers. That choice completes her character. She was not kind because she was weak. She was kind because kindness was part of her strength. Even after betrayal, she does not become empty. She becomes clear. She learns who deserves access to her heart and who does not. She learns that her care was never wasted, even if the people around her failed to honor it. And she learns that truth can arrive late and still change everything. So what do we take from this story? First, do not judge someone based only on the family version you heard. Every family has a public story and a private cost. Second, if someone is doing quiet work, notice them before it is too late. Third, never let someone shame you for the love you gave. If you cared, if you stayed, if you did the hard work, that matters even if nobody thanked you. Fourth, when people lie about you, do not always rush to scream over them. Sometimes the strongest move is to keep your proof, keep your dignity, and let the truth arrive at the right time. And finally, remember this: an apology is not a key back into your life. You are allowed to accept the truth, accept the apology, and still choose peace without returning to the place that broke you. Kestrel's story stays with us because it is not only about betrayal, it is about being seen. Sorrel saw her, Beryl saw her, and in the end, the whole room had to see her, not as the wife who walked away, not as the woman who abandoned the family, but as the woman who stayed when staying was hard and left only when staying would have meant losing herself. That is the difference. Walking away from responsibility is one thing. Walking away from disrespect after you have given everything is another. Kestrel did not abandon love. She abandoned a lie. And sometimes that is the bravest thing a person can do. If this story made you think of someone in your own life, someone who quietly carried a heavy season while others only talked about it, reach out to them. Tell them you see them. Tell them their work mattered. And if you are that person, if you have ever stayed in the hard room while everyone else became busy, then hear this clearly. Your care counted. Your sacrifice was real. Your silence was not weakness. And even if nobody clapped for you then, the truth remembers.